Thank you very much. So good morning again, and my name is Dechlan Pillay from the National Disaster Management Center. Thank you for having me present this morning. Thank you to the last presenter for that interesting topic on the perceptions of trust as well. And I will also cover some of that from a policy perspective in my discussion. So at the National Disaster Management Center, I head up on a temporary basis the ICT component, and I am in control of the early warnings and capacity building sort of directorate, which is intertwined in terms of ICT. So there's a lot of stuff that we trying to build and trying to do. And I hope that the presentation will just give you a brief insight into some of the things. And because of the time, we obviously can't go into every single thing. So some of the presentation is going to be quite technical, and some of it is going to be quite boring as I lay the foundation. So just bear with me. So I hope to get through most of the slides. If I don't, then I'm sure that the slides will be sent to everybody in attendance and also posted to people that are online. I think maybe we're just going to lay some foundation for what the Disaster Management Center does in terms of the country, who are our customers and how are we organized, what's our legal framework. And once that is put in place in terms of this presentation, you'll get to understand exactly why we have the kinds of gaps that we have in South Africa from a disaster management perspective. And especially coming out of managing COVID-19 as a pandemic, what are some of the things that we can learn and adapt as we go through, especially because also we're dealing with a global kind of environment where risks, hazards, vulnerability is constantly changing. Let me just see if I can just get rid of this. Can everybody see the screen properly? I just want to just check that before we move.
Yes.
Okay. So the NDMC, and I'm going to refer to the acronym through most of the presentation because it's quite long to keep on saying Disaster Management Center. It's underpinned by a legislative requirement, as you can see there, which is the Act, and a policy framework which really links into the Act, spreads across the 3 spheres of government because it must deliver the function. And that's the basic underpinning of the function at a national level. So wherever it's placed, it has to adhere to the fact that it must comply in terms of legislative requirements. The Act is also currently in some form of amendment, just to make it a little bit more fit for purpose. And we exist in terms of the NDMC to obviously promote an integrated and coordinated system of disaster management, with the emphasis of obviously prevention and mitigation. And we are spread across the country through what we call our hands and legs, which are our provincial disaster management centers. There's 9 of them, and the municipal disaster management centers under them. So the function is quite broad from an implementation point of view. Just listening to that, you'll also understand that the function is implemented at local level through this. So the Disaster Management Center is not a response agency, and many organizations across South Africa think that we are there to respond. We are there to coordinate the function of disaster management. It also includes a facet of response, which we do. We have various sort of requirements from a legislative perspective, and that's why the last point there in terms of what would the Disaster Management Center comprise of, but also what would the municipal and the provincial centers also have. Why is my computer not moving? Sorry, guys, I think I'm a bit stuck. Okay. Sorry, I think the computer's got a bit of Monday blues. I think I didn't give it enough coffee. So in terms of the KPIs and enablers that defines the function, I've listed it there. It's really around capacity building as enabler to as a requirement to the disaster management function. Risk assessment, which involves defining the hazard and understanding risk on the ground, and a very important component of risk reduction and response and recovery. So you'll also notice that number 4 is at a national level coordinated through the province and through the different stakeholders. But we have enablers that run across these different KPAs, and they really relate to information and technology, which helps the function, training, education, and research, some of which we're going to talk about today, and obviously a very important part, which is the 2 types of grants that we have and how it's distributed. So really, I'm not going to go word for word in terms of this. You have the slides to sort of go through at your leisure, but I just wanted to also just check that we understand that the policy framework is enabled at the ground level by various players, and these could be interest groups, civil organizations, organizations like the Gift of the Givers, and so forth. We sit within local government, which means that our parent company now is COCTA, and we really have to align to their vision, mission, and their values from a program 4 perspective. So in terms of their vision related to us, it's obviously to keep a safe, sustainable, and prosperous communities, whether it's smart or non-smart communities, but really these tie back directly to the local government sort of sphere and the constitution. So I'm not going to go through this. You'll have this on your own to just look at. From a function perspective, we are a very small unit. We used to be close on 50 individuals at the national office. We're now hovering just below 40. We are spread across the functions according to the KPAs and enablers. So this is how we are this is how we function from an organizational organogram kind of perspective. How do we conduct the function? So there's various fora and various government departments that help us move the disaster management function through its different phases for large-scale disasters like flooding, like tropical cyclones, and like pandemics like COVID-19. So we have an advisory forum, as you can see on your left-hand side, that comprises various technical task teams and teams with the national government sector departments, which really should be implementing the function. And the disaster management function is embedded into national government departments by their very own legislation. In terms of the NDMC Center, you'll notice that although it sits in the middle of this entire flow of information, and this is not by any means spec to any particular direction, we coordinate this through the different departments, through the different fora, and also through our reporting structures, which is at national interministerial councils and ministerial executive councils. So we also just bring in this little component of the NAT joints there. These are coordinated through the South African Defence Force and the SAPS, and you saw much of that in the last KZN floods that we had. Some of the important, from a financial perspective, we do an immediate grant and a reconstruction and rehabilitation grant. This is both to the national provincial disaster management centers and to the national sector departments. So for roads and reconstruction, this grant goes to the National Transport Department, and then they have to allocate it to the relevant provincial department, and obviously have due diligence and oversight from a national treasury perspective and a PFMA point of view. So you can see that there's various moving systems within the function itself, which we coordinate at the national level. You'll also notice that at this level, and the things I've just explained, it's very difficult to get down to the local sphere of operation. We expect the local sphere and the municipal sphere to be working in conjunction with how the province functions are for disaster management. And Sometimes this works at a good sort of pace and efficiency level, but sometimes not. So we are, let me just move this, sorry. So as a country, we are faced obviously by many different kinds of hazards. We are also coming out of, we're also within a context as a country of, a long political apartheid history that divided the urban and rural areas. So we have different levels of vulnerability in the community. And we also face this onslaught of climate change in various forms, altering the way in which we have the hazard play out on the ground, and we have the continuing increase of vulnerability through the different sectors. So this is just to show you that there's multiple forces at play from a disaster risk perspective in South Africa. Something I just need to just explain here is that, sometimes we look at the hazard within the disaster management formula, which defines the risk at the ground level, and see two different interplaying factors. One is the fact that sometimes the hazards are overwhelming from a community perspective, but also because we are dealing with different levels of vulnerability, we have different levels of disaster impact on the ground. So in areas where you have a medium sort of hazard, but high vulnerability, you'll find that the disastrous effects are quite large. So in the recent KZN storms, you'll notice that we lost many people on the banks of the rivers in KZN because they were informal settlements that were placed there, and they had no other place to sort of put up these areas. What is happening with my computer? So, sorry, colleagues, my system seems to be a bit stuck this morning. So we have, at the national level, we have lots of intentions of building good systems, making sure that everything plays together. And this is just an example of something that we had planned for how we would manage monitoring systems across the country. Come in from the left-hand side for weather. It'll be involved through different sector departments. We'll have a standardized, warning platform, and we'll be able to deliver the message. Now, this seldom works the way it's planned. So in managing disaster management at any country level, there's always these areas that we have to manage from a local government perspective. Coming into the Disaster Management Center 10 years ago, I realized that, we didn't really understand the hazard very much. And since part of the conference is really speaking to the concept of research, we had to find a way to understand completely the hazard. And we took time to obviously work through various institutions to develop these hazards. What you see on the map is our monitoring of drought on a monthly basis. And, we use a global index through a research organization called the Agricultural Research Council, which is through, which is part of agriculture, to really unpack this. And we did this through several years, just so that we could bed down the hazard and understand it from a spatial perspective, understand it from a data historical perspective, and ensure that we keep some kind of sustainability in the system, just so that we can have these monitoring systems going on continuously from a month to month, and build these out as the technology develops. So understanding the hazard, and I just gave you an example of drought, is really about understanding the different components of the hazard. And this really makes a difference, because when we deal with the sectors and when we deal with the interventions for drought, we really need to be dealing with the proper interventions from the hazard perspective. So the understanding of the hazard was quite crucial for us. And this is something that we've done with research organizations across the country. Many of them own this kind of sort of portfolio of data and are able to bring this expertise along from a quick outlay of a project perspective. The ARC was able to define the intensity of drought, the frequency, as in, which season it's occurring, whether there's an overlap in seasons, and whether we can pick out of that any climate change impacts. What's the duration? Is it going throughout the summer season or the winter season for the winter rainfall areas? And how regular are we getting dry spells or wet spells? So the drought hazard is really defined by the average of wetness per quaternary catchment throughout the country. And once we have a drought figure, we'll be able to see, well, already what we know in terms of the western part of the country and the northeastern part of the country for the summer rainfall areas. This helps us as a baseline data set so that we can understand exactly what's happening on a month-to-month basis. Pairing that with understanding the full component of risk, we obviously had to do a vulnerability assessment that looks at various components of vulnerability across the country and have that as dynamic sort of layers within this formula so that we could overlay hazard against vulnerability and capacity to give us a final risk score. Now, many of these maps, because it's done at a macro level, are largely indicative of risk in these areas. And because we found that, not all 9 provinces perform the same way, we had to make sure that we are giving the provinces that are underperforming in terms of understanding their own risk something to work with. And therefore, these products came out in the manner that they have over the course of the years. So the provincial areas or the province through its various stakeholders and fora can take products like this that's developed at a national level and redevelop it using their own localized data. We also then factored in seasonality for these products. How would the hazard change through the different seasons? And also then get an understanding of where the overlap is from the winter rainfall to the summer rainfall, and also be able to do the proper advisory to the disaster management function at a provincial level, from either helping them develop their contingency plan for the season ahead or helping them understand their seasonal aspects, because not everybody can read a map or understand a map or even understand the data on the map. So we've also then firmed up in the recent years our partnerships across the different institutions in South Africa. And I'm just giving you an example of South African Weather Services through their parent department, which is DIA. And we've come a long way just understanding just what the weather impacts are for different parts of the country. It forms a majority of what happens from a disaster management perspective. Many of the disasters are weather related, so it was important that we start with just this part of the work with this organization so that we could have something that we can work with. We also found that the way we partnered with them was quite important for the impact-based modeling, using actual data, doing the pilot sites, and really bringing that model for the benefit of South African communities within context. And context is important from developing models, as you would know, so that we have the right sort of parameters in there and we understand exactly what the local effects of the disaster are going to be and how we're going to manage that. So to this, we're also putting a lot of technology efforts around improving the modeling, forecasting from the forecaster's desk, which was done manually before on paper-based maps. Now it's moved into a GIS sort of environment. You'll notice that on the bottom there, and sorry that I cut that out so badly, that the actual indicators and the dashboards are quite informative when it comes to the local levels. We're obviously sitting with issues around language and a misinterpretation of the warnings and local radio not giving the warnings the way it's supposed to be, and just this reluctance of the communities to act upon warnings. You'll notice here that we're factoring in this concept of taking the modeling further into not standard operating procedures that come from a sector or a national level, but also just what the community would do in the event of excessive rain, for example. We've also just registered the country with the International Charter for Space to give us space-based imagery across different disaster platforms. We did this in the late 2021 in November. It took us quite some time to actually get the country membership through. And we're happy that we sort of finally managed to get it successful for South Africa. And what the charter does is that it allocates different space agencies to help in different disaster incidents for the country. What you're looking at now is the Jagersfontein disaster early on this year, where we had a slime dam that burst its banks in Bloemfontein, covering most of the communities that were in close proximity to the dam. On the left-hand side, you'll see the mine image of the mine disruption, the slime dam disruption on the eastern side, and you'll notice the delineation through the red sort of polygon. That length of that polygon, if you measure it in real terms, it's about 11 kilometers. So we had a quick spread of the sludge down the river, through the river channel. If you look at the right-hand side, you'll notice for those individuals that are into remote sensing that we actually have a wetland in that area, but we also have highly vulnerable communities around that area. So satellite imagery, data, information systems, international collaborations, networks around the disaster management function help us do this, verify exactly what's been damaged. So the left-hand side images are actually before the sludge hit those communities, and then on the right-hand side, it's those houses that are covered by sludge, partially damaged. Some are completely damaged. We are able to count them. We are able to then reallocate those individuals to safe centers, manage the issues around education, social welfare, safety packs, people that still want to reside in the area, obviously allocate them within the different communities. Data information systems also help us to do this, understand what's the impact on the wastewater treatment. You can see that gridded line on the left-hand side, that small block there. That's the wastewater treatment that rendered this area completely devoid of any water coming into that area, that helped the interventions at a local level, but also just to track the sludge going into the different areas. The left-hand side, the right-hand side image also gives us an understanding, and you can see that the cloud cover is preventing some of this image being seen, but we were just watching what was happening in terms of the dams downstream. So we bring the technology together with the products, with the intellectual property around that, with the research through various technology platforms at the NDMC. One of the main ones is our ability to map these phenomena on the ground from a spatial perspective. So we have a fully fledged portal that's now integrated to bring active live weather warnings to communities, to give our disaster management operations centers and their teams quite a daily update in terms of what's happening on the ground. We obviously continue to manage the impacts of severe weather for the country, bringing our procedures for the impact-based different levels of warning. We're busy with the standard operating procedures to make sure that communities that are at the cold face of mass sort of flooding, seismic activities, tropical cyclones, receive the help that they should get. And we're also working very closely with ensuring that our SNDF, the financial models behind that, are speaking to the function of disaster management from a response and recovery perspective. 3 years ago, we took a step to understand the whole big data component of disaster management from information coming in to an information going out perspective. We had a bit of a slow start when we started with phase 1. This is just a schematic, and apologies for the technical nature of the diagram. What you're seeing in terms of the diagram is all information coming in on the left-hand side, getting processed and stored in what we call the data lake, and the developed tools just giving us a diagnostic about what's happening in the country at any time. A good example here would be monitoring the social networks through some kind of sentiment dictionary, where we're able to understand things like, hotspots for xenophobia, social unrest on a daily basis. So developing these tools so that we can also help our other sister departments take their applications forward. So this one is also just being used by Department of Justice for any social unrest, gender-based violence incidents across the provinces. Working on the ground obviously means that we have to use whatever communications platforms that are available at the local level to deliver these messages. So we just don't only develop at the national center, using everything that we've done through research and different products and tools, but we're also making sure that we use whatever technology that we can to make sure that the disaster management, the traditional leaders, the councillors get this kind of information that they need. There's also various other reporting tools that we're trying to make quite simple to understand and use. For example, in early January, we'll be rolling out something that's linked to the impact-based modeling as to, what is the feedback from in terms of the last mile of receiving the warning. So when you receive the warnings, what do? You just read it, or do you act upon it? And then obviously taking the information from there to make it really a community-based activation protocol that assists at a national level for response and coordination. The disaster management system is constantly changing. This is our roadmap as we move into the next 3 years, exactly what we will do from our current operating model on the left-hand side, bringing in our fire services and urban search and rescue components, obviously working with NGOs like Gift of the Givers to understand what's the best for the country, addressing the key elements in our revised operating model, and also looking at the critical outcomes on the right-hand side in the next medium-term 3-year period. Thank you very much for that. I hope that I did justice to the time and the content. Thank you very much. I'm just going to stop sharing now.
Thanks very much, Mr. Pillay. That engendered trust, I must say, knowing that the National Disaster Management Centre is on it. But it must be extremely difficult to get implementation on a local level. Can you just comment a bit more on that?
Yes, thank you very much for that. Can you hear me? Just give me a thumbs up.
Yes, can hear you.
Okay. Yes, implementation at a local level is difficult, but not impossible. I think listening to the previous speaker around trust and how it plays out in pandemics, it also has the same sort of pattern at local level for various other disasters. And you'll realize that at local levels, you have almost a dichotomous view of societies. You have very vulnerable and you have very capable societies. And it's really around the vulnerability at the highest level that we're concerned about from actually managing the disaster at a local level. So yes, it's difficult. The coordination is much better than 5 years ago because we're constantly trying to improve the system of disaster management against all the other runaway issues at a local level, political interference, large vulnerability levels, changing hazard, global dynamics, populations migrating. So the dynamics at a local level remain the same. We're just trying to make the function a little bit better.
Right, thank you for that. I'm also impressed at the ability of the centre to handle large amounts of data. Is that capacity sufficient? It looks very, very good from this side, but can you comment on that?
So when you have to build at a national level, there's never enough people, and you know that. So we're always struggling to get enough people, the correct people to build the right sort of systems for us. But it's also about matching people, resources, and where the technology is going that we have to grab at a very quick pace. So it's very difficult. We have a very small team, but we do it with the collaboration of our partners. And I think the partnership is what takes the organization forward. Just to give you an example, the Big Data platform is in its 5th year. And we took 2 years just to lay down the foundation, just to understand how does this thing work. It works in big corporations like Edcon, but we've never seen it work at a public sector perspective. And learning those lessons and not to make the same mistakes that other institutions have made, doesn't require a lot of people. It requires a lot of thinking. So we're trying to think in the right direction, and we're trying to develop large forward-thinking platforms that can handle massive amounts of data. The Big Data platform was just so that we bring it into context from a COVID-19 perspective. We realized that when we got into COVID-19 in March 2020, the health department already had some kind of system bringing in data. And because of the sensitivity around the pandemic, they refused to share that with us. And so we had a fully functional big data platform and we had no data coming in. And then we realized that the only way we could do this was through all the self-testing apps. We wanted to get a picture of the country very quickly. So we tried to route some of the self-testing apps into the platform so that we could understand where people were testing and where there was a certain trend in the terms of the temperature, the fever, and the 3-day average, and so forth. So the international, the national sector collaboration is what would make functions enhanced from a disaster management perspective, and I guess from all other perspectives as well, if we have that cooperation. So it's not only trust from the public to government, it's also trust within government.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I hope that we will handle the next pandemic even better, such as communication within government departments and between government departments and the sharing of data. Thanks very much again, Mr. Pillay. That was very informative. And I just want to point out that this discussion forum is actually held on behalf of the science councils and statutory body sector of NSTF. We have all, just about all of them represented in the NSTF. And this discussion forum, this topic, is formulated and conceptualized by a committee of those representatives. So SANSA and CGS and others are actually members of the NSTF and have requested this topic to be discussed.